And so with that, I would like to turn it over to our presenter today. Bibi Black is the General Counsel for the Office of the Minnesota Secretary of State, and I will turn it over to you now.
Thank you, Sarah, and good afternoon, everyone. Just let me tell you right up front, this is the exact same presentation I gave last month at the Attorney General's office. So if you saw that, this is the same thing. And I just want to warn people. We'll get right into it. So things are a little different this year. I said 2 years ago, same program, I said, hopefully we won't have to do all these things that we're doing in 2020 that are different from what we've done before. And that, in fact, is the case. We have been able to, thanks to the vaccines and other developments, we no longer have to have mask mandates or be afraid of, at least temporarily, being with other people. So that's very helpful. So a lot of what happened in 2020 went away. What I want to do today is tell you something about the normal, if anything is normal anymore, elections process. And I certainly hope that after you finish this program, that you can answer basic questions from your friends and neighbors, be more informed as government lawyers when whatever happens this year is brought up, and just simply be better leaders and citizens overall. So, okay, these views are my own, not necessarily the views of the Office of Secretary of State Steve Simon, future or former Secretaries of State, or even my friends and family. And I've been with the office a long time, as you can see here. So there have been a lot of experiences that inform my presentation today. You're not going to be able to read this, but it'll be in the slide deck. This is just basically what I'm trying to cover today. Let's move right along. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is talk about the 3 levels of responsibility in our voting system, responsibility and administration. The Secretary of State's office, the Secretary is the chief election official. The office trains and certifies county election administrators and administers the computing system, basically the statewide voter registration system, also our election reporting system. We interface with other state agencies and also the Social Security Administration. We also interface with all 4 million eligible voters who can look up online whether they're registered or not. They can also check their absentee ballot status, as well as registering. Continuing, we administer, as I said, we administer the database. We certify that election equipment meets state standards. That's a big deal. We conduct data matches and provide data to county auditors. We handle the NCOA Postal Service changes. We get information from corrections on felons or persons who are no longer in a felony category. DPS data regarding persons who are temporarily in the country. We get courts data. We exchange data with other states in the Electronic Registration Information Center so that we are better able to eliminate people from being registered in multiple states at a time. So that's the state level. The county auditors, they have other jobs, many of them, most of them really. Election administration is, they might have 15 different responsibilities. This is one of them. They are responsible for all aspects of voter registration in their county. It's not us, it's the counties. They verify the voter data with the driver license folks or Social Security. They send the non-forwardable postcards to voters. They look at the SVRS data that we send to them on deaths, felonies, guardianships, etc. They forward information to county attorneys when there are potential violations, and then the county attorneys do investigations, and the county auditors do the ballot layout, programming, and printing for the ballots for state elections. They also purchase and maintain the supplies, the tabulating machines, the accessible vote equipment. They program the voting equipment. They issue absentee ballots. They do a lot of training. And then on the back end, they compile election results and submit those to the OSS website along with the canvassing, the official canvassing reports, and they conduct post-election audits. Okay, so now we're down to the third level, the bottom level, where in the cliche, the rubber meets the road. So cities and townships determine their precinct boundaries. They establish the polling locations. They hire the election judges. They assign them to the precincts. They train and certify them if the county has delegated that, which it does in some places. They conduct the healthcare facility absentee voting, where election judges visit people in healthcare facilities, including nursing homes. The cities can administer absentee balloting if they're delegated, and most importantly, they operate the polling places on election day. We have about in excess of 3,000 polling places for the over 4,000 precincts in Minnesota. That's a lot of places to establish and run. Okay, we have 4 major parties still this year. We'll see the result of the election will determine what it will be going forward. But we have the Legal Marijuana Now Party, the Grassroots Legalized Cannabis Party, the Republican Party, and the Democratic Farmer Labor Party, and they appear in the ballot for partisan office in that order. Special elections, as you know, we had a special election for the 1st Congressional District earlier this year. We had a special primary, and then we had a special election. Then we had the special election for the stub term, which it runs through this January, was held on the same day as the primary for the regular 2-year term. So special elections can be complicated. This is a redistricting year, so we omitted the April and May special elections, but there were still some in February, and there were obviously the one in August, and a special election can also be held in conjunction with the general election, which is 2 weeks from today. Back in 2020, so now I'm going to turn to, what's different this year, and maybe the subheading is we're back to normal for many things. So in 2020, the legislature did make some changes. The polling places could be moved up through July 1st of 2020. Usually they have to be set by the end of the prior year. We got them out of schools. Schools were a last resort. Well, now you're okay to have them in schools. We have processing time for the absentee ballots. They can start opening the ballots 7 days before, but they have to be done 24 hours after the polls close. So 8 p.m. on Wednesday, November 9th. We didn't have electronic candidate filings and petitions this year, and you couldn't collect the signatures electronically, unlike 2020. So this year, everything went back to the paper. Okay, speaking of filing, let's talk about what happens before the election. We have the candidate filing period. The normal time is in the last part of May. I believe this year was May 17th to May 31st. So there's also a late filing period for some local elections, which occurs at the time of the August primary. So most state and county offices and some others file in the early part of the filing period in May. Petitions are possible instead of the filing fee. If you're a minor party or independent candidate, you must have a nominating petition. Okay, the number of signatures required from your district varies depending on what you're running for. Obviously, statewide or congressional offices require more than simply running for the legislature. Something that is coming up is if you want to be a write-in candidate, there are no write-ins in the primary, but if you want to be a write-in candidate and have your votes counted and you're running for federal, state, or county office, federal, state, or county, you must inform us before the 7th day before the election. So that deadline's coming up. If you're running for local office and are being written in, they count those votes whether you ask them to or not. And in fact, in many townships in Minnesota, nobody files for office or appears on the ballot, and it's all write-in. For whatever reason, it's sort of a traditional thing in some districts. Okay, what if somebody makes a mistake? And we'll talk about some of this a little later. There is an errors and omissions process. So this is really We don't have much in the way of administrative relief in elections. It's all pretty much through the courts. It does provide relief from errors by election officials. And yes, election officials do make mistakes. They're human, just like everyone else. Errors, whether already occurred or imminent, can be litigated. You do, it's getting a little late for that, folks. I think we're probably on the basis of latches beyond the time when something could be considered, unless it's tremendously important. But if it isn't obvious enough to have been caught by now, I think we're done for this year. And I believe we had I think 18 cases of various kinds, many of which were 204B.44. Obviously, the ballots have long since been printed and distributed because early voting started on September 23rd, Friday, September 23rd. So in judicial, federal, and multi-county state offices, it's the Supreme Court that has jurisdiction. Otherwise, it is the district court. Whoops, here we go, district court. So you have to serve all the candidates for the office. And then I think today, or possibly Friday, we finalized the last, where there was an order issued by the Supreme Court in the case down in Murray County, where they printed the ballots with the old district numbers. It's a redistricting year, so there are new numbers in many places. So Murray County is completely within a legislative district and completely within a Senate district. Unfortunately, they printed the old number on the ballots, and of course, I'm sure the campaigns have been talking about the new number. So they're going to send a notice to all their voters to make sure they clarify that. And that's the last one, I think, for this year. Perhaps we'll write a summary article about all the different cases that we had. Okay, let's talk about registering and voting, because this is Minnesota is a real leader in registration and voting. We have election day registration. Now, there's not that many states that have election day registration, and we were one of the original six. The original six, that sounds like the National Hockey League from the 30s. The original 6 states were Maine, New Hampshire, no, excuse me. No, that's right. Maine, New Hampshire, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and I think there were 2 states out west. So we adopted election day registration back in the 70s. Let's also remember, we don't have party registration for partisan primaries. So you don't have to have a list of partisan voters to campaign to. So that's helpful in administering election day registration as well. We have online voter registration. We have absentee balloting without excuse. That's only 8 years old. Before that, you had to either be ill, out of the precinct, acting as an election judge in another precinct, religious holiday, or you maybe said you were and weren't really. So now nobody's a criminal. Everybody gets to do their absentee voting. We run it for 46 days before each election. And then we have what's called direct balloting in the last 7 days prior to the election. So that's going to start a week from today, or actually Wednesday. So that would be the 2nd. No, it does start the 1st, where you could actually put your ballot not in the envelope to be opened later, but right in a tabulating machine. And you can see it get counted. Okay, so it wasn't always that way. As I said, we only started election day registration in 1974. And, Minnesota had, like many other places, but Minnesota had restrictions. Women couldn't generally vote until 1920, although we were allowed to vote on library board elections starting in 1898. African-American males were allowed to vote in 1868 after the amendment to permit that failed twice. We used to have in Minnesota a provision that allowed aliens to vote because there were so many people who had immigrated in a very short time that if you were committed to the citizenship process, that you were allowed to vote. That was eliminated in 1896 after the Great Wave really had been over. But if you didn't have that, you hardly would have had self-government in many Minnesota localities, which were made up of predominantly immigrants. And then, of course, who was eligible? I always put this in my presentations on elections because it's really, this is from our original Constitution, the 1858 Constitution, and people need to remember where we came from. I always think you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you came from. I don't know if you can read this. This is, the Constitutions were handwritten. And these texts are courtesy of the Minnesota Historical Society, but they've been reproduced elsewhere in various books. At one time, they were in the Minnesota Statutes Annotated. Okay, let's look at this. 1, white citizens of the United, this is who's eligible. White citizens of the United States. White persons of foreign birth who shall have declared their intention to become citizens. This is the alien suffrage I was talking about. Conformably to the laws of the United States upon the subject of naturalization. Okay, 3, persons of mixed white and Indian blood who have adopted the customs and habits of civilization. Roll that around in your head for a minute. And then 4, persons of Indian blood residing in this state who have adopted the language, customs, and habits of civilization after an examination before any district court of the state in such manner as may be provided by law, and shall have been pronounced by persons by local court capable of enjoying the rights of citizenship within the state. Think about that. That's not the law now, but it was in 1858. Okay, so now 164, excuse me, years later. So here's what the law says in the Constitution now. 18 years of age or older or more, citizen of the United States for a period of time, reside in the precinct for 30 days next proceeding. Okay. And then we have a provision about who's not entitled to vote. So it's sort of the general rule and then the exception. A person who hasn't met the above requirements, or you've been convicted of treason or a felony unless restored to civil rights. A person under guardianship, or a person who is insane or deemed mentally or not mentally competent. A word about the guardianship on this slide. The court has to specifically take away your right to vote in order for that to apply. They have to actually check a separate box on the guardianship forms. The judge has to. So you have to be a U.S. citizen, 18 years of age or older, lived here for at least 20 days. Okay, so this is more liberal than the Constitution. Not incarcerated, not under a felony sentence. We're still waiting for the decision in the Schroeder case. I don't think we're going to get that before the election. That's a case on felon voting. Again, not declared incompetent, or, as I said, not under guardianship where the court specifically took the right away. So here's the Schroeder case I mentioned. The petitioners asked the court to say that if you're off paper and in the community, you should be allowed to vote just like anybody else who's in the community and living out there free range. In the district court, the Judge Gilligan in Ramsey County dismissed it on summary judgment, found for the statute. And then this case has been going along long enough that it was in my presentation 2 years ago. It was appealed in November, really before November, 2 years ago. Court of Appeals basically affirmed it's currently still before the Supreme Court. There you see the case site A20-1264. Okay, now we're going to move on to absentee voting, which was a really big deal in 2020. It's still a big deal, although I don't think as big a deal as it was in 2020. But a lot of people got used to the convenience of absentee voting. So you can apply for it online. You can apply for an absentee ballot right up until the Monday before the election. Okay, the day before the election. Online, in person, or by mail. Obviously, delivery problems are going to control the later you apply, okay? Because it has to be mailed to you. The ballot is a paper ballot. It's mailed to you, and you have to get it back, okay? Now, you can drop it off. You can have somebody else drop it off, as long as they only do up to 3 in this election. You can mail it back. So absentee voting is it's logistical. The issue is logistical now. You're entitled to ask for an absentee ballot, regardless of, you don't need a reason. It's no excuse absentee balloting. We started September 23rd, so it's been going for a while. And as I said, the agent can only deliver the ballots of 3 persons in any one election. This was upheld in a court case in 2020. There are 2 categories of absentee voting. There's what I would call regular absentee voting. But if you are covered by the Uniformed and Overseas Citizen Absentee Voting Act, UOCAVA, so if you are an expatriate, if you are temporarily overseas, if you are in the military and posted at a base, then you could be under UOCAVA. Absentee voting starts 46 days before the election, and that's both by mail or in person. You can vote absentee in person at the location designated by the county, and they may have more than one. Your witness can be the election official. Otherwise, you have to have a witness who is an eligible Minnesota voter or a notary public. The court said eligible, not registered, because since we have election day registration, every eligible voter is really qualified, should you meet the witness requirements, qualified to vote. So many years ago, the court said, well, we're not, it says registered in the law, but we're gonna say that means eligible. I mentioned the direct voting. We do track absentee voting in the statewide voter registration system, and the person who is the voter can see where their ballot is in the process. So that's something that is useful if you really want to make sure your vote has been received, counted, etc. That is available online. County and city election officials have to have, the jurisdiction has to have an absentee ballot board. The absentee ballot boards review ballots every so often during the balloting period to make sure that the envelope is properly filled out, that the witness has signed, that the identifying number is on there, that it's that the voter has signed. If it does meet all the requirements, it's accepted. If not, it must be rejected. If it's rejected within 5 days of the election, they have to attempt to contact the voter. If it's before 5 days, which we're still in the period of before 5 days before the election, you have to send the voter a replacement ballot with an explanation. But obviously, the further away you are, the more problematical that's going to be, just from a logistics standpoint. You know, if somebody in your neighborhood asks you about absentee balloting, I would be very clear to them that time is of the essence. Okay, now, until about 12 years ago, absentee ballots were delivered to the precinct and they were counted there. Some of you may remember this. After the close of the polls, they would count the absentee ballots. So this had the virtue of distributing out the work, but there were other issues that were created by the absentee ballots not being counted until election night. So now they're counted by absentee ballot boards established by the county or municipality. The old process, which some people remember, and now maybe I wouldn't call it misremembering, but it's no longer applicable, was that you could void your absentee ballot by going to the polls on election day and voting. And then when they got to in the precinct to looking at your envelope, they'd say, oh, Jane Roe voted, and so we're not going to even look at this absentee ballot because obviously you can't vote more than once in an election. Well, it's not like that now. So if you have had a ballot accepted on or before the 7th day before the election, so if you voted absentee a little earlier, you cannot vote at the polling place, and you cannot cast another absentee ballot that would supersede the prior ballot. That is something people don't know about. If you change your mind, if you voted absentee early, you can ask your ballot to be spoiled, and you can get another replacement ballot, and you can revote. If you're going to revote, you have to revote the whole ballot, okay? So don't just vote the one office that you changed your mind on, revote the whole ballot. What's magic about the 7th day before the election? This is when you can now start processing the accepted absentee ballots. You can open them up, you can put them in the machines to be counted, okay? You must mark the rosters, whether electronic or paper, with AB for those ballot envelopes that you open and count. You can't vote twice in an election. If the ballots arrive after the rosters have been printed or programmed into the accessible vote equipment, poll books, you have to, if you're the county or city, you have to make sure that you contact the precinct or you supplement the materials to make sure that it's marked as absentee ballot, so the person does not vote at the polls. As I said, the absentee voters or absentee votes can be counted up to 24 hours after the close of the poll. So 8 p.m. on Wednesday, the 9th of November. UOCAVA voting for military and overseas voters. The county auditors run this. There's a special application process and special procedures for those voters. Basically, the blank ballot can be emailed or faxed, but it has to be printed out, marked, and then physically returned by mail or by, I suppose you could get Federal Express or DHL or whatever means you can to return it. There's no witness requirement. You can use the federal write-in absentee ballot. The ballots are processed just like other absentee ballots. Now there's another category of absentee voting when you have visits by election judges who are municipal employees, basically, for this purpose. Even if they're just volunteers, they're the election judges are paid for by the municipalities, so they are employees. They go to the healthcare facilities and hospitals. They can help the voters complete the absentee ballot application. They have the information available to see if somebody's registered, and they provide the ballot, and you fill out the ballot and they collect it right on the spot. Okay, so the alternative procedure, some people like to call this early voting. We call it direct balloting more frequently, but it is similar to what some other states call early voting, in the sense that you can put your ballot right in the machine, and then you're done, and you're counted, and it's all over. So this is during the 7 days prior to the election. It's for in-person voting, absentee voting only. The voter completes completes the ballot. The voter, first of all, has to complete the voter certification, and then that's submitted to the clerk in the elections office right there. And then the ballot goes into the tabulator, and the voter is recorded as having voted. So they're done. In order to accommodate this and other absentee voting processes, we have extra hours. We have 10 to 3 on the Saturday of the weekend before the election, Tuesday election, and then the night before the election, open until 5 p.m. Okay, those are the minimum hours. Could be open later. That's up to the county and the city. Okay, now, some other way of voting that's not at the polling place is mail balloting. Mail balloting is allowed in townships of any size outside the metro, cities outside the metro with fewer than 400 registered voters, precincts with fewer than 100 voters, and then for certain special election referenda for school districts and other similar kinds of districts. In a mail ballot precinct, all the registered voters are sent a ballot by mail. Ballots are returned by mail or delivered back to the county auditor's office. There is a ballot board that is used to accept, reject mail ballots, similar to absentee balloting, and SVRS is used to process and track mail ballots. There's also agent delivery. You can designate an agent by affidavit. They can collect your AB. They can bring it back. This is a fairly unusual situation and is most useful for somebody who suddenly can't get to the polling place. If you break your leg and or maybe something worse, and you're in the hospital and not going to get out, obviously the healthcare visit has already taken place if it's election day, but this is something that's possible for you to vote if you haven't already voted. But these time deadlines are pretty strict, so pay attention to that. I also will add that there also are provisions for voting for persons with disabilities as a result of the Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm not going to go into that now just because of time, but I just wanted to mention that there are accommodations available, and that is something that we've used the last several elections. In 2020, there was a provision in the DSCC versus Simon case. This was the limit of 3 persons who could assist in marking a ballot. There was no limit on assistance that wasn't marking the ballot, but you certainly couldn't assist, you couldn't mark more than 3 ballots under the prior law. And that was struck down by the that was originally a consent decree, but it was affirmed by the Minnesota Supreme Court in, I think it was September of 2020, and that continues on. That's one of the changes in 2020 that really unrelated to the pandemic, and so that continues on. And then there used to be a provision that candidates couldn't be assisting voters, and that was also struck down in an earlier Ramsey County case involving now former St. Paul Council member Daitao. Simply put, these things were preempted by the Federal Voting Rights Act, which has provisions for assistance, but has no restrictions similar to the ones that were being litigated here. So it was preempted. By the way, I might say, let me just point out that our general elections in Minnesota, because we hold general elections and primary elections every 2 years. We have, of course, municipal elections in the odd year and maybe school districts, but because our general and primary elections generally are concurrent with elections for federal office, the Federal Voting Rights Act controls. So that's why this litigation was important for state voting as well. It's a state and federal voting occurs simultaneously. Okay, so in 2020, people were very interested in drop boxes because they could deposit their absentee ballot put it in the envelope. Actually, there's several envelopes, and deposit it in the drop box. Drop boxes were already contemplated in mail balloting under 204B.45, so it wasn't a totally new concept. And the legislature in 2021 enacted legislation to regulate the use of drop boxes. We aren't going to have anywhere near the usage we had 2 years ago. Only a few counties are complying with 203B.082 and implementing drop boxes. There are funds for implementing drop boxes, but it does require continuous video surveillance 24/7, and so that is seen as a barrier to use of drop boxes, but it's there in the statute now, and it may increase in the future. Something from 2020 that didn't carry over. We had two separate state court cases. The cases suspended. There were consent decrees in these cases approved by the courts. The witness requirement was suspended, and in the LaRose case, they gave an extra week for returning ballots. Also, there was the NAACP suit said, well, you know, we want an absentee ballot to be mailed to every voter in the state. That was not done. So these cases do not apply in 2022. They were only for 2020. So you have to have witnesses this year for absentee ballots, and you have to have the ballots in before the close of polling on election day here in 2022. Okay, so what happens on election day? We have, as I said before, we've got 4,000 precincts, we've got 3,000 locations, and there's about 30,000 election judges. Most of them are volunteers, not in the sense of not getting paid, but in the sense of this is a job that you do for 2 days every 2 years, plus the training. So this is really a civic thing. You have to have at least 4 election judges, unless you have a really small precinct. Some urban precincts have 15 or more election judges, just to handle the traffic flow and help people along. There is training required. The head judge gets more training, and you have to have, I say balance here, but what it really is you cannot have a majority of election judges being from the same major political party. So if you've got 4 election judges, you can have 2 from one party, and then the other 2 have to be either from another party or they have to be nonpartisan. Okay, so now what happens in the voting? We have a mix of electronic rosters that are on poll books, okay, which are generally tablets, and we have paper rosters. If you're a pre-registered voter, you sign the oath that confirms that you're eligible. If somebody is challenged, the election judges, and you can be challenged for a variety of reasons, maybe some election mail was returned undeliverable when sent to your address in the precinct. There might be other reasons where information from other departments indicates, oh, we think this person might be ineligible because maybe they're a felon. The election judges will, when that voter comes in, explain, well, you're challenged, and then they will ask a series of questions designed to determine eligibility. So also we have election day registration. Okay, if you're not registered, if you're in the correct polling place for where you live, haven't voted absentee, and either you have proof of residence, which is either documents or a pre-registered voter who vouches for you, you fill out the voter registration application, you sign the roster, and you get a ballot. So now pre-registration closed 20 days before the election. So that was last week, last Tuesday. You can't hold on if you're a group that's soliciting voter registrations door to door, or maybe you're at a park location with a table and you're offering this service to people who are coming to the park or whatever. You have to turn those in. You can't hold them. You've got to get them into the process. Last day for pre-registration, as I mentioned, was last week. You can register at the polls. Okay, so you're not shut out as in some other states yet. I know that there are some other Midwestern states where today is the last day to register, but we're beyond that here in Minnesota. You can register at the polls. You need documentation or a voucher. The documentation, I'm not going to go through this here. You can look at the slide when you get the slides, but basically it's almost, certainly the vast majority of people do this with their Minnesota driver's license or ID card. Okay, here's a long list of approved IDs that you can use to register to vote on election day. Again, I'm not going to go through any of this. We have proof. I do want to mention, we have two things going on here. We want proof of identity, okay? Proof of identity, who are you? And proof of residency, which is, do you really live in the precinct and have you lived here for the required period of time? So we have a whole bunch of different things for the residency, which have been greatly expanded over the last 20 to 25 years, including leases, student fee statements, bills for your cell phone, for your TV, cable, for internet services, for your utilities, a whole bunch of other things. And if you're a college student and your college provided a housing list, then that can be referenced as well. Which always leads to the question of, well, you know, how are you making sure that only eligible voters vote? A few things. First of all, we do have matches with driver license information and birth dates and SSN numbers. When you send in your voter registration, we match that with databases from these other places. We have conviction information. We also have information on people being restored to civil rights available. We have the US Post Office and COA information. We have returned election mail. We have information from DPS about who's got expired visas or any kind of visa date, expiration date on their driver license. If you have that date on your driver license, you are not a citizen. We have information on name changes. We have, you can, as a private citizen, file a challenge to somebody whom you think is actually not residing, whom you think is not residing in your precinct. Maybe they have a second home elsewhere where they really spend more of their time, and that's, you think that's their residence. So you can do that. You can, and then finally we have the ERIC information I referenced earlier. And these are all to be resolved by election officials. Okay, so moving on, precincts. And of course, it's a redistricting year. So the precincts are generally, in normal years, set up by the end of the prior year. Obviously, the normal process where you don't change a precinct after December 1st doesn't work when, in fact, you don't get the new district lines until, in this year, we got the new district lines from the courts on February 15th. Okay, so because of redistricting, they had extra time up to nearly the end of March in order to change polling places. When you get to the ballot, I think I mentioned that, oh, I did this backwards, excuse me. We use candidate rotation in nonpartisan races and in primaries for partisan offices. Remember, I said earlier that we have 4 major parties, and I mentioned the order in which they appear on the general election ballot for each office. That's not the case for nonpartisan races and in primary ballots within a party. So the rotation is by precinct. We have very few precincts that are still using paper ballots without tabulating machines. And either way, we try to rotate the candidate names so that each candidate is in each position. If there are 4 candidates, there are 4 positions. Each position over a fairly equal area of the jurisdiction. Okay, voting hours, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m., except if you are in a non-metro township with fewer than 500 voters, you can wait till 10 a.m. And the metro definition in, whoa, I'm getting a headache here, includes the 11 county metro area. So it's the bigger one. So that's including Chisago, Assini, Wright, and Sherburne, as well as the usual metro that we all know and love. Something people should understand that many businesses don't understand. You can be absent without penalty to vote at any time during the day, okay? Particularly on regularly scheduled elections, such as we're going to have on November 8th. Many employers don't understand this. They try to force the employee to do it on lunch or before work or after work? Well, the employee is entitled to be absent during work hours. Okay, that's a state law. Now, can you negotiate? Okay, so what if you've got 5 workers and you need 3 at all times to be present? How do you fit that in? You don't want everybody to go at once. They could, but usually what happens is management and the employees negotiate that. And by the way, this is not dependent on whether you're represented by a labor union. This is state law for everybody. We get a lot of calls on this the week before the election from both workers and businesses. And the businesses are regularly shocked to hear that they have to do this, even though this law has been on the books for a long, long time, probably, I don't know, 70 years. Okay, when you get to the polling place, who can be there? Obviously, voters while they're voting. If you're assisting a voter, including vouchers, then you can be there. And remember that the limit on assisting in the voting place has been eliminated. The election judges obviously are staffing, and there are other election officials like the city clerk or the county auditor or their staff or the Secretary of State and their representatives who can be in the polling place. Challengers can be in the polling place. Now, challengers are different in Minnesota than poll watchers that you hear about in other states. Challengers have to make their challenges based on personal knowledge, and they can't talk to the voter. They can't touch anything. They can't be within 6 feet of the voter. They talk to the election judges, and then the election judges conduct the challenge process. So it's really more limited. You can't make a list, by law, you cannot make a list of who's voted. It's just very limited. The election judge, usually the head judge, can appoint a sergeant at arms to maintain order in the polling place. And that does not have to be an election judge. That can be another person. By the way, police can, upon request of the election officials and judges, can be in the polling place to maintain order at their request. But after the election judges feel that order has been restored, they have to get out of there. You can have student groups with the permission of an agreement of the county auditor, city clerk, election judges, and their teachers. Media are allowed to go in. Obviously, the usual rules about not disclosing identities of people without their consent apply. And then finally, as I mentioned, people designated by the Secretary of State. So for example, if we were to have international election observers this year, they would work with our office and receive a letter entitling them to go and observe in polling places. An exception to the general rule of you can't be within 100 feet of the polling place, or if it's 100 feet of the entrance to the building, or if it's public property, anywhere on the public land on which the polling place is located. An exception to this is that exit pollers can be at the door to the polling place so they can ask their questions as people leave. Okay, I mentioned that poll watchers are different here than they are in other places. They don't collect political information. That's just not the Minnesota way. They just have to challenge on the basis of eligibility. Additionally, okay, conduct in or near polling places. No intoxicating liquor in the polling place. No campaign buttons or materials in the polling place. And by this we mean for candidates or questions that are on that ballot. We get this question a lot about the MAGA hats. It's an off-year election. Even if you were to take the position, which I think we did in 2020, that the MAGA hat is a representation of a campaign for one of the presidential candidates at that time. There's no presidential campaign now, but you can't have you cannot have a partisan. So you can't wear a T-shirt that says "Vote Republican," because that would be a campaign material. Okay. No lingering within 100 feet of the entrance to the polling place. Okay, if you're a voter, you got to get out of there after you voted. And certainly no solicitation of voters within that zone. All right, so now we've voted. It's 8 o'clock. Now we're going to close the polls. Everybody who's in line at 8 p.m. can vote. After the voting is finished, the polling place becomes open to the public, and all those rules I just talked about go away. The public can watch, but not interfere with the ballot counting. Now, what that means in the modern world means that you print out the result tape. Actually, you print out several copies of that, one copy of which can be posted. Generally, that's posted at the county auditor's office. We have results. The results cannot be disclosed prematurely. That is a violation. The results, by the way, the results on election night are unofficial. You can get the results from the county auditor or the Secretary of State. Most county auditors have some websites. Certainly, we have an election result website, which is quite robust and has been going since 2000. So our website is at this, actually, we have a new web address in addition to this, which is at the end, sos.mn.gov. Again, unofficial results until properly certified by the canvassing board, which is going to be 3 to 10 days after the November election here. Results can and do legitimately change. So people should not be shocked if there are changes in results between the unofficial results and the official results. So again, the county canvass, the county auditor, the district court administrator, the mayor of, usually it's a city, of the most populous municipality in the county, and 2 county commissioners, again, 3 to 10 days after the state general election, and they certify to various items. So the state canvass is going to be 3 weeks after the general election. So that's Tuesday, November 29th. It's the Secretary of State, 2 Supreme Court justices, and 2 district court justices. And again, they canvass the merged or aggregated county reports covering the entire state. So the county canvassing board, I'm not going to go through this because we're short on time. And these are the details behind the things that I just said. There can be corrections to obvious errors, but this is pretty rare, and it requires some agreement, or it requires a district court order. Let's talk about recounts. There are recounts. I was here for the 2008 recount. Recounts are conducted manually. Okay, so in Florida in 2000, for anybody who's watched the movie Recount, you saw, of course, that's just a movie, but even the news reports of the day showed the punch card votes, which we don't use and haven't used for a long time. Punch card votes were run through the machine again. That was what they called a recount. That's not a recount in Minnesota. In Minnesota, we have 2 categories of recounts. We have a state paid recount where the margin was close enough that there's a legitimate interest of the state in making sure that the result is confirmed. It's got to be 1/4%, except for legislature, it's 1/2%. And it has to be requested. If the losing candidate accepts the results, there is no recount. If you're going to pay for it yourself, you can have a gap that's larger than the percentages I mentioned. But you have to pay, and you have to pay up front. You can have a partial recount of up to 3 precincts, and if you don't see votes moving, you can cancel and you'll get a refund on what hasn't been spent. So in the recount official is a Secretary of State or a deputy recount official, such as the local county auditor. Candidates have to, or candidate paid recounts have to be requested fairly quickly. So the recount is open to the public, but they have to keep their distance. They can't touch anything. Really, they have to be far enough away to not really be able to see very much. Basically, the purpose of the recount is simply to determine the number of votes cast for each candidate. We don't deal with other issues. If you want to do that, you file a contest after the recount. Look at 204C.20. I always like to mention this. Look at 204C.22 for the very, very long list of principles and rules on how to determine a voter's intent. In the recount, generally speaking, there's a team of election staff, usually 2 people, and then over their shoulders are the representatives of each of the candidates. Not all the candidates, just the candidate with the most votes in the preliminary and the candidate with the second most votes. Everybody else has gone home and is not relevant to the recount, and their votes are counted as other. So after the recount occurs out in the field, the canvassing board comes back, rules on challenge ballots, and then certifies the result of the recount. The time for contest starts after this canvassing board certifies the result. We used to have disputes about duplicate ballots. As a result of the 2008 recount, that was eliminated from the subject of a recount. Also, rejected absentee ballots, also a big factor in the 2008 recount, because there were a bunch of them that were wrongly rejected that the courts required us by order to count. That is now out of the recount process, and it's only up for discussion in the election contest. So the election contests are all under Chapter 209. Any eligible voter in the jurisdiction can contest the election. They have to make sure that everybody is properly served. There's a limited time period for filing a contest, and you have to serve the proper persons. The grounds for a contest, okay. An irregularity in conduct of an election or the canvass of votes, a question about who received the largest number of votes legally cast, and more broadly, deliberate, serious, and material violations of election law. That's kind of a big tent right there. So you have to file and serve to the other candidate, unless the only ground for contest is the number of votes cast, and the contest must be tried within 20 days, beginning within 20 days after filing, and proceeds in the normal case as far as practicable. A remedy can be a new election. There have been contests that have resulted in new elections. And generally speaking, the party losing pays the costs. Okay, so now what else? After the election, certificates of election are issued after any recounts or the expiration of the contest period. We at Secretary of State issue all the certificates for all the judges, all the federal and state offices, and then the county auditor takes care of the rest. So what are the remedies for election issues? Recount, contest, and then I mentioned earlier about errors and omissions, petitions. Otherwise, there really are almost no administrative remedies for election issues. It's got to go to court. I like to show this slide. We're almost done. I like to show this slide because this is the credit to Eric Magnuson, former Chief Justice of the Minnesota Supreme Court, who sat on the 2008 recount. This is the chart that he and other members of the canvassing board developed to try and interpret how they would count votes. It's not binding on subsequent boards, but it's very interesting to see. And I would say, look at this on the slide deck when you get it. Okay, so what can you get from us? You can get voter lists, you can get the precinct table, you get the precinct finder, you can get maps of what the districts are, voters guides, and here is our website at www.sos.mn.gov. There are some nominal fees for some of the items, including the phenomenal maps that our huge plotter can print out for you. I just want to note the SELEC case from 2020, which basically, if it's not on the public information list as defined in 201.091, then you can't get it. as a member of the public. Whether it's public or private, they said it's inaccessible. Okay, so a little homework. This is where we have all the guides. Thank you for staying until the end of this presentation. And here is our election. This is our election division contact information right here, phone, fax, email. And then finally, you can reach me at this email and phone number, or if you want to send me something by USPS, there's the address. And in the words of Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck. And that's our program. And Sarah, I know we're about a minute over, but do we have any questions in the chat? If I don't get to the questions, please send me an email at this address here, bb.black@state.admin.us, and I will try and address your question offline. But Sarah, do we have anything?
The only question that came in actually was related to the Secretary of State office itself, and whether the positions within that are considered nonpartisan. I don't know if you want to address that briefly.
Sure. Okay. So obviously, it's a constitutional office. The secretary is not nonpartisan. The secretary is elected on a partisan ballot. The secretary has certain members of his staff who are appointed officials, appointed by him to the office, and they serve at the pleasure of the secretary, just like other government offices. The governor appoints the commissioners, same thing. I am civil service. I am nonpartisan. I have worked for Republicans and Democrats. The staff are civil servants. So the director of elections is an appointed position, but all the staff in the elections division and all of our computing staff are all nonpartisan civil servants, and they are classified employees, I guess is the technical term. I see one in the chat about observers. Just a quick one. OSCE is not coming this year. That's the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. They have come in other years. They have not informed us that they are coming this year, so I believe they are not coming. Sarah, was there anything else?
No, that's the only question that I have here, so we can
Okay.
go ahead and conclude. Thank you
Lovely.
so much for this program today. We really appreciate it.